November 2011, a man walked into a Texas office building and made a promise. He was going to save one of America's oldest retailers and turn it into the next Apple. He wasn't wrong to be confident. This man had already done it once. He built the Apple Store from scratch. The Genius Bar, the glass staircases, the concept that a retail store could feel like a temple. He turned Apple's stores into the most profitable square footage in American retail history. His name was Ron Johnson, and the company he was about to walk into, JCPenney, was about to lose more money faster than almost any retail turnaround in modern history. 17 months. That's all it took. 17 months to turn a struggling but stable department store into a company hemorrhaging billions, watching its oldest and most loyal customers walk out the door and never come back. This isn't a story about a bad CEO. Ron Johnson was, by every measure, one of the most talented retail minds of his generation. This is something more uncomfortable and more useful. This is a story about how being right about everything except the one thing that mattered can destroy a company faster than being wrong about everything. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly what happened inside JCPenney's Texas headquarters. The meetings, the memos, the moment a $200 million deal to poach a home goods icon backfired, and the pricing decision that, in hindsight, should have been the easiest thing in the world to test. It wasn't tested, and that single choice cost thousands of people their jobs. To understand why JCPenney hired Ron Johnson, you have to understand what JCPenney had become by 2011, a slow, aging, unglamorous department store chain that hadn't meaningfully reinvented itself in decades. Founded in 1902, JCPenney had once been a pillar of American retail, a place where middle-class families bought school clothes, appliances, and Christmas gifts. But by the 2000s, the company was stuck in the middle of a brutal retail sandwich. On one side, Walmart and Target offering rock-bottom prices. On the other, Macy's and Kohl's offering better style and sharper branding. JCPenney offered neither. It survived on a business model built almost entirely around one psychological trick: the illusion of the deal. JCPenney's stores were a carnival of markdowns. Prices were marked artificially high, then slashed through a relentless cycle of coupons, sales events, and clearance racks. Shoppers rarely paid full price for anything, and JCPenney's most loyal customers had learned to love the hunt. Finding a $60 shirt marked down to $19.99 wasn't just a purchase. It was a small victory. It made customers feel smart. Before the Johnson era, JCPenney, though profitable, was seen as a poor performer that was losing ground to competitors like Macy's and Kohl's. Between 2007 and 2011, the company's operating profit collapsed, dropping from close to $1.9 billion down to essentially zero. The board knew something drastic had to change, and they thought they'd found their answer in Silicon Valley's most celebrated retail architect, Fortune. Ron Johnson wasn't just an executive, he was a legend. At Target, he'd helped pioneer the idea of cheap chic, bringing designer collaborations to a mass discount chain. At Apple, working directly under Steve Jobs, he built the Apple Store concept into one of the most successful retail formats ever created. When Johnson talked about reinventing a store, people listened, because he'd already proven he could do it. Twice, JCPenney handed him the keys. Johnson signed on as CEO with a pay package worth $53.3 million, and Wall Street reacted with genuine excitement. Finally, the thinking went, a company stuck in the past had found someone who understood the future of retail. Johnson arrived in Plano, Texas in November 2011, and he moved fast. Too fast, as it would turn out. He showed up ready to lead a transformation at the speed of light. By January 25, 2012, less than 3 months later, the new JCPenney would unveil its new look. A week later, the new pricing strategy would be revealed.
Johnson's vision for the new JCPenney was genuinely ambitious. He didn't just want to tweak the stores. He wanted to rebuild the entire company from the ground up, modeled loosely on what he'd learned at Apple. The plan had several pillars. First, transform JCPenney's massive, undifferentiated stores into collections of smaller branded boutiques inside the larger store. Mini Levi's shops, mini Martha Stewart shops, each with its own identity, essentially turning JCPenney into a landlord for other brands under one roof. Second, and most aggressively, kill the coupon culture entirely. Johnson believed and argued forcefully that the endless cycle of inflated prices and fake discounts was insulting to customers and unsustainable for the business. In its place, he introduced what he called fair and square pricing: simple, honest, everyday low prices, with no coupons, no clearance gimmicks, and no games. On paper, it was a compelling pitch. Multiple analysts agreed the old system was cynical. Prices were inflated specifically so the sale would feel meaningful. Johnson wanted to strip that manipulation away and just tell customers the truth about what things cost. Johnson moved with remarkable speed to bring this vision to life. Within his second week on the job, he was already meeting with Levi's CEO Chip Bergh about launching in-store boutiques. He recruited a wave of high-profile designers. He redesigned the company's iconic logo. He rebuilt JCPenney's marketing around a completely new visual identity: cleaner, more minimalist, more premium, closer in spirit to an Apple product launch than a department store ad campaign. One of Johnson's boldest early moves came within weeks of his arrival, when he attempted to lure home goods icon Martha Stewart away from longtime partner Macy's, offering Martha Stewart Living Omnimedia a merchandising deal worth roughly $200 million, along with an investment of $38.5 million for a 16% stake in the company. It was audacious, headline-grabbing, and exactly the kind of bold power move that had defined Johnson's career. Macy's would eventually sue over the deal, dragging JCPenney into a costly, distracting legal battle. Still, in these early months, there was real energy inside JCPenney. Employees who had spent years inside a stagnant, declining company suddenly felt like they were part of something ambitious again. The press coverage was enormous. Investors were cautiously hopeful. For a brief moment, it looked like Johnson might actually be building the next great American retail turnaround story. Then, the new pricing strategy launched, and the story changed completely.
Here is where Ron Johnson's story turns from ambitious to cautionary. In early 2012, Johnson announced a major overhaul of how JCPenney did business. A new, fair and square, everyday low pricing scheme designed to replace the fake prices the company had used for years. Coupons were gone. Clearance racks were gone. The three-digit ending prices, the psychological trick of pricing something at $19.99 instead of $20, were even simplified into round numbers, Forbes. The idea sounded great in theory. In practice, it ignored something crucial about JCPenney's actual customer base. JCPenney's longtime loyal shoppers didn't hate the old system of coupons and markdowns. They loved it. The hunt for a deal wasn't a flaw in the business model. For millions of JCPenney's core customers, it was the business model. It gave them a sense of control, of smart shopping, of getting one over on the store. Johnson had built his reputation at Apple, a company whose customers were drawn to premium simplicity and were largely price insensitive. JCPenney's customers were the opposite: price-sensitive, deal-driven, and deeply habituated to a very different kind of shopping psychology. And there's a deeper reason the strategy backfired that goes beyond nostalgia for coupons. When a company that has spent years training customers to distrust its regular prices suddenly claims its new regular prices are the honest ones, customers don't necessarily believe it. Johnson wasn't just changing a pricing model. He was asking customers to trust a story that the company itself had spent decades undermining. Perhaps most damaging of all was how Johnson handled the pivot itself. When advisors suggested testing the new pricing strategy on a limited basis before rolling it out company-wide, Johnson reportedly rejected the idea outright, responding simply, "We didn't test at Apple." That single sentence captures the core failure of the entire turnaround. Apple could launch products without market testing because Apple was creating entirely new categories of products that customers had never seen before. There was no legacy behavior to unlearn. JCPenney was the opposite. It had decades of established customer behavior, and Johnson was trying to overwrite it overnight, based purely on conviction rather than evidence. The results were immediate and brutal. Sales collapsed almost as soon as the new pricing rolled out in early 2012, and by that summer, even Johnson himself was forced to acknowledge the strategy wasn't working.
Longtime shoppers, confused and alienated by the disappearance of their familiar sales cycle, simply stopped coming in. And because JCPenney hadn't tested the plan on even a handful of stores first, there was no early warning system. The company found out it had a 5-alarm fire only after it had already spread through the entire chain. By the end of 2012, the financial damage was staggering. JCPenney lost $4.3 billion in sales for the year, with declines accelerating with each passing quarter. In the fourth quarter alone, including the crucial holiday shopping season, sales dropped 28.4%, contributing to a net loss of $552 million, the single worst quarter of the year. Online sales hit even harder, falling 34.4% at jcpenney.com compared to the year before. By early February 2013, the company's cash reserves had shrunk to $930 million, a decline of 38% from a year earlier. Yahoo Finance. The board that had once given Ron Johnson near total control began to panic. By April 2013, just 17 months since he'd arrived in Plano with a mandate to reinvent American retail, Ron Johnson was out. The company brought back its previous CEO, Myron Ullman, in what was widely described as a meet the new boss, same as the old boss moment. Wall Street's reaction was telling. JCPenney's stock price actually jumped in after-hours trading the moment news of Johnson's departure broke. Investors weren't mourning his exit, they were relieved. By the time it was all over, JCPenney's stock price had dropped by more than 50%, and the company had lost close to $1 billion for the year. More than 20,000 employees, many of whom had genuinely believed in Johnson's vision, lost their jobs, as the company scrambled to cut costs and undo the damage. What makes the JCPenney disaster such a powerful case study isn't that Ron Johnson was incompetent. By nearly every account, he was one of the most gifted retail minds of his era, and much of his underlying diagnosis of JCPenney's problems was correct. The old business model, built entirely on manufactured discounts, genuinely was unsustainable long-term. The failure was in the execution, and specifically in a handful of avoidable decisions that compound retail leaders study to this day. Lesson 1. Your customers are not a hypothesis, they are a fact. Johnson designed a strategy around who he believed JCPenney shoppers should be, rather than who they actually were. Understanding your existing customer base isn't optional context, it's the foundation everything else has to be built on. Lesson 2. What worked somewhere else does not automatically work here. Johnson's playbook was proven at Apple, but Apple's customers and JCPenney's customers were fundamentally different people with fundamentally different relationships to price and value. A strategy's track record only transfers when the underlying conditions transfer with it. Lesson 3. Speed without testing is just gambling with better branding. "We didn't test at Apple" is one of the most quoted lines in modern retail history for a reason. It captures exactly how conviction, unchecked by evidence, becomes recklessness. A single pilot program, run in even 50 stores, could have surfaced the coupon problem in weeks instead of a year at a fraction of the cost. Lesson 4. Trust, once spent, isn't easily rebuilt. JCPenney had spent decades training customers into a particular relationship to pricing. Undoing that relationship overnight, without transition or explanation customers actually believed, broke something that took years to partially repair. Ron Johnson's story isn't a story about a fool. It's a story about brilliance without humility, about a leader so certain his instincts were correct that he stopped asking whether the evidence agreed with him. And in business, that gap between confidence and evidence is exactly where the biggest, most expensive mistakes are made.